Здравейте, вдъхновения! Аз съм Ро и това е един по-различен и много специален епизод на До успеха и обратно. Преди да ви представя днешния ми гост, набързо ви напомням, ако все още не сте се абонирали за канала, да го направите сега. И не забравяйте да ни пишете в коментарите вашата обратна връзка за епизодите. С днешния ми гост се запознах на събитие, организирано от Фондация за нашите деца. И веднага разбрах, че той е човек, с който искам да си поговоря повече. Защото Тони McMurray е изключително вдъхновяваща личност. Животът му минава от едно предизвикателство директно в друго. И всичко, което прави, обвързва с кауза по-голяма от него самия. Той е един истински лидер. Човек, който знае как да води и вдъхновява. Човек, който десетки други последваха по пътя нагоре към 56 връха в цяла България. Какво е да преживееш земетресение в подножието на Everest? Как да останеш мотивиран, когато се налага да сложиш мечтите си на пауза? И кое го кара да се чувства истински българин, ще ни разкаже самият той. Приятно гледане!
I really am looking forward to this. So my wife said to me, my wife joked and said, you talk for 2 hours, Tony. I can talk for 24 hours. So anyway, I need to be quiet and listen to your questions. And I'm okay not knowing the questions. So that's something I'm quite, yeah.
The first thing I'm going to say to you is not a question, but it's a very big thank you for accepting this invitation and for being here today.
Well, do you want me to, just to give it a bit of different flavour, I can say, you could even, I'm just feeding you a question here, you could say, Tony, you're English, but have you learnt any Bulgarian? I can say, аз съм Тони, аз съм от Англия, живея в Bulgaria около 8 години, аз обичам планина, аз обичам, I could say a few words, or do you think that would be a bit false, because this is supposed to be in English?
No, we can do a mixed episode, English and Bulgarian, why not?
Like I say, I don't say a lot, живея с жена ми Sofia и Сарафово, апартамента до Бургас, около 5 години. As I said, my teacher literally is the other side of our apartment, so if she was here, she'd say blah, blah, blah. But yeah, I'm an Englishman. We're very lucky. The world speaks English.
Why you decided to come live in Bulgaria?
Well, I've worked for the same company now, 30 years, a company that is American-based, Ingram Micro. And if I wind it back to 2012, Ingram Micro set up its first European shared services. Shared services is where you put the work in one place, in a central location, and then you support the countries in a region or in the world. I was involved in moving some of my UK staff into Bulgaria because I was the finance director or CFO of the UK. Then in 2018, my predecessor decided to leave Ingram Micro Bulgaria, and I was invited to be interviewed because I was always a big fan. Whenever I came over to Bulgaria to meet my extended UK team, I was seen as somebody who was a fan of the process, the concept, and the people. And thankfully for myself, I managed to win them over at the interview. And in June 2018, me and my wife left England and we moved here to Bulgaria, and I headed up the Ingram Micro Shared Services, which at the time was about, I think, 900 people, supporting countries in different languages, in different processes, finance, sales, customer service, all out of our site here next to the mall.
Was it easy to convince your wife to come here?
Well, an interesting point there. My wife at the time had been running a tea shop for 15 years, also an outside catering company, small family run one. And the story there was, I'll always remember it, it was January 18, I messaged her, as we normally do each day, and I said, I've got some news for you, I've got an opportunity. And I mentioned the name Bulgaria, and at some point she messaged that afternoon and said, I've been to Romania, is it anywhere near Romania? She went on a school trip in the 80s during Ceausescu's rule, so she knew where it was, but she didn't know, and what she didn't realise at the time was I was literally on the point of saying yes to the job, or yes to the interview. So we spoke about it, and I think it worked well. Firstly, she's a big supporter of my career, but secondly, I think with the catering she was doing, my wife is a trained Latin and ballroom dancer, so she does that in her spare time. But running the catering business, I think the 15 years, the existence of the tea shop had come to a natural end. So this opportunity for both me and her was just at the perfect time.
And she also needed a fresh start. Yeah.
Yeah, fresh start, and she splits her time between the UK, where her mother and her brother and her sister live. As many of your listeners know, travel from Luton in England to Sofia is very regular. There's 3 flights a day. Some people don't like them, but I'm a big fan of Wizz Air. They certainly helped me during COVID to get back and forth. But yeah, I am a resident. We both have ID cards here in Bulgaria. And I just love the country that I now call home.
Do you remember the moment when you felt like you're Bulgarian?
I'll tell you, that's a really good question. I've got an old boss who, and I'll give you the answer, but as I often do, I'll give you a longer answer.
Oh, I prefer it.
My old boss, who is back in the UK, he moved to Australia to become the GM of that country, and he said to me exactly what I'm about to tell you. He said, one Christmas I'd gone back. I regularly go back for Christmas. In fact, in a couple of weeks, I'll be back there to spend a couple of weeks and meeting up with friends, relations and stuff like that. And he said to me, at what point when you came back at Christmas, did you feel when January comes round, coming back to Bulgaria is actually coming home? I would say it was the 3rd year. And he said the same thing, him travelling back and forth. He'd come back at Christmas from Australia. He said it was the 3rd year for him. So what I mean by that is, when I visit the UK, I visit the UK as a visitor. Yeah. Let's be clear. I've lived in the UK most of my life. I've spent a lot of time in Australia. I lived there for a while. I lived in mainland Europe on and off through my work. But in that 3rd year, I looked at Bulgaria as coming home. Coming home. I've got many friends through work and through my climbing of the mountains here in Bulgaria. I would say I've got equally as many friends in the UK, but the friends in the UK, they're the ones that are always there, when you see them, like I'm going to in a few weeks. You see them after many years, and it's just like falling back into a friendship that was there yesterday. So the long answer to your question is, I would say it was the 3rd year. And what do I mean by that? I started to understand the language, the food, I can happily eat banitsa, the odd rakia. I was once asked on an interview on TV, did I drink bozar? No, I don't like bozar. Do I like tripe? I've tried it once. No. But I think I've embraced the food. I've certainly embraced the culture. And I love the fact, and this is coming as a Brit, I love the Bulgarian attitude to the work-life balance. I think being a big fan of the environment and everything that's here, we had friends over at the weekend, and my friend is from Scotland, his new girlfriend's from Lithuania, and she saw aspects of Lithuania here in Bulgaria, and we made the comment that we're not dishing what's back in the UK, but Bulgarians need to understand what they've got here is very special. Yeah. Yes, there are some black spots that, there are protests about this and about that, politicians the world over, there are challenges. But the people, the food, the culture, and just that makes it for a very pleasant place to live. And as I say, I call Bulgaria home, and I proudly say that.
I'm glad to hear it. So nice to hear that from a person that is not born here, but has choose that this country will be his home.
Well, can I just add to that? Last year. So if you go back in history, in my early life, I was very fortunate. I was very good at sport as a teenager. Yeah. And as a 17-year-old, I became a national champion in athletics, in the long jump. Wow. So I was very lucky. I was tall, I was fast, and I managed to jump into that sandpit longer than anyone in my country for my age. And I competed for my country. I travelled a bit in Europe, Germany, Ireland, etc. Now, I've proudly stood on top of a podium and listened to the English anthem, the British anthem, which I'm proud to listen to today. But last year, one of my various things, my first priority is my job. But secondary, I'm involved in other activities. And one of them is I'm the chair of what we call the Duke of Edinburgh International Award, Bulgaria. In that capacity, I decided to enter the London Marathon last year. Not as an Englishman. When I filled out the form in 2023, I filled it in as a Bulgarian with my Bulgarian address.
Why?
So when I got accepted, well, there's a practical reason, because as many of your listeners may or may not know, the application process for the London Marathon now is around 900,000 to 1 million.
It's almost impossible. I'm dreaming to run this marathon as well.
So I entered as a Bulgarian, so I got in as an international runner, and the chances are, it's like winning the lottery. If you've got a smaller pool of people, then there's a better chance. So I turned up at the start line, not wearing my British, but wearing my Bulgarian. I had a Bulgarian top, Bulgarian shorts. I met the Bulgarian ambassador in London, and I was only one of 21 Bulgarians. And I ran round there, and I'm getting emotional sort of talking about it.
Only 21 Bulgarians, and you're one of them.
And I was one of them.
Wow, amazing.
And when I ran round, this is the great thing. One of the guys said, Team Bulgaria, kaksi. I said, mnogo dobre, a ti. And he said, kaksi. And no word of a lie, he had an English pint, and he raised it. So and I'm an Englishman wearing a Bulgarian top, shouting to a Bulgarian, raising an English pint, and try and get that in your head as I'm running through East London.
Wow.
So when I got to the end, I was so proud to wear it, and I stood in front of the Nevsky Cathedral a few weeks later and did a short speech, and those who follow me on Instagram will see that I've pinned it, and it's a 1-minute speech, all in Bulgarian, talking about being Bulgarian and wearing the medal of a Bulgarian, not a Brit. I'm still British. If England play Bulgarian football, I'm an English supporter, but I support being a resident. When people go to other countries, I believe they should embrace the culture of the country that they live in.
But what was the feeling to be there as a Bulgarian?
I was very proud because I wore it and people were looking at me, and the top's got Team Bulgaria. Yeah. I felt like, I don't know, maybe recently we all watched the great volleyball team losing the final to Italy, and I passed Nevsky Cathedral when all the volleyball players were in the main square there, and I was proud to watch the celebrations. I'm a sports person. I celebrate, and let's be clear, the Bulgarians could be seen as underdogs, and I felt the same running through there. I've ran the London Marathon 4 or 5 times, the previous times as an Englishman, but I had extra pride running as a Bulgarian, wearing the Bulgarian, and I actually at the end, I had it in my pocket. As I go across the line, I lifted the Bulgarian flag, which and the guy doing the speaking at the end called out, and we have a Bulgarian coming down the mile. And I could hear him saying that and thinking, I'm British, but I'm Bulgarian today. So it was very, I'm my capital city and I'm a big fan of London. So yeah, it was a very emotional day.
Yeah, it sounds like this. And going a little bit backward, you said you work in finance. You're the CFO of...
Yeah. I'm the CFO, So
I want to know about the way you get there. Are you always been into finance? Was that your dream?
Not at all. Not at all. And I often tell this story. As a youngster, I was good at sport.
Yeah.
And I was good with music. So my sport had me playing football. I was good at football. I was good at rugby, which is a sport not many people in Bulgaria know, but it's like football, but it's a different shaped ball. So football, rugby, and athletics and basketball. So 4 sports I was good at. Probably I was better at football and athletics. So as you go through your teenage years, you then want to specialise. And then in my teenage years, probably around the age of 14, 15, I realised I was good at running and jumping. Mm-hmm. So what I did with that is, as I said to you previously, I became a national champion. And I took it to the next level because I decided to do a degree in sports science at a well-known university in London. Mm. But alongside that, I happened to be good at music. Now, I wasn't exceptional, but from the age of 8 or 9, I'd be in front of people playing my woodwind instruments. Oh, so wow. The woodwind instruments, I started with the clarinet, I then played the saxophone. Saxophone quite literally was too heavy for me as a kid to carry. Mm-hmm. I then moved on to lighter instruments, and some of the old Baroque instruments like the recorders is what I specialised in. So sport and music, I took that to my degree. So what then happened was, during my degree, I knew I couldn't be a professional athlete. I knew I couldn't be a professional musician. I didn't really want to become a teacher in either of those subjects, so I looked completely elsewhere, and I decided to go, in those days it was called a vacation traineeship. I just applied to loads of finance firms. I liked the idea of wearing a suit, and I liked the idea of just working in an office. In those days, in my younger days, you know, it was before the mobile phones, it was before the internet. I liked the idea of understanding how a business works. So I stepped away from sport, stepped away from music, and then I trained as an accountant in London, and that's where they were my early years of understanding.
But what was leading you? What feeling was leading you? It's something completely different from everything you have done.
It is, and my older sister, you know, God rest her soul, she's no longer with us. She was a credit controller in a company, an American company, based in my hometown outside of London, and it was talking to her at the time, you know. She was involved in finance. I didn't know what finance was. Here in Bulgaria, a lot of the team that worked for me, you know, did masters at Sofia University, you know, the National University of Economy, blah, blah, blah. They all did a master's degree in finance. I didn't study finance until I was 21 years old, so I came late. But I always say to people, what helps me is doing the music and the sport. You know, they say left brain, right brain. I think bringing that sort of wider experience gave me a fresh outlook. And I often, when I give some of my presentations on finance and some of my, you know, career, I often like to say the finance person of today and the future isn't just someone who looks at a set of numbers. Every accountant should be able to add up. Every accountant should be able to prepare accounts. But the finance professional of the future, and I'm a qualified accountant with an organisation called CIMA, Chartered Institute of Management Accountants, where I'm a fellow. And in that institute, and many around the world, is the modern accountant needs to be more broader. And that's where I think my broader background, because I didn't come from finance at the early age, I came late to it. I think the dynamics inside me gives me that well-rounded view on a bit of practical side to it, the technical side, and you know, the connection people to people. So that's how I look at the modern finance professional. So I'm very fortunate. I didn't choose that path, but I eventually ended up as a finance. So finance can be seen as boring, but I certainly make finance a bit more exciting.
Yeah, it's a choice. And I'm wondering, with the music and with the sports, you have like used to be in the spotlight, but when you realize you can be a leader and you have the leader in you?
It's a really good question, because I'm known as someone who I've now done 2 TEDx talks here in Bulgaria. I'm someone who often is asked to be up on stage and chair big events and stuff, and people often say to me, where did this confidence come from? And I basically say to them, the story I've just shared with you, i.e., when I was younger, and this is sort of, you know, getting sort of more personal, I was a skinny guy. I was a redhead. People say I'm no longer red, I'm more blonde. And skinny redheads at school were picked on. And I was picked on, you know. I overcame that quite clearly by being good at sport and being good at music. I managed to overcome those pressures, if you like, and I rose above it. And in doing those, I then was centre stage, whether it be on the athletics field, the football field, or on the music field, you know, in front of, you know, as a 9-year-old playing my musical instrument in front of a load of people. I wasn't confident then, but the more times you do something, the more you get familiar and you get confident. And even in my last 8 years since moving to Bulgaria, I think I've got an added confidence because, to be clear, English isn't the mother tongue of Bulgarians. So an Englishman, with some of my confidence and my speaking skills, standing in an audience of people who use English as a second language, I think I've given myself added tools and clarity. So I use my hands better. I talk, as we are talking here, to explain myself and my thought process, simply because I'm addressing an audience where English isn't the mother tongue. Again, it's another piece of the formula that says I've got a really good progression to where I am today.
You have exposed yourself to uncomfortable situations, so maybe that's built the confidence.
There is. I mean, in amongst all that backstory, I've had some life-threatening instances. One of the most famous ones, which people, I talk about this in my first TED Talk, was in my journey, if I take you back, when I decided to not do music and sport and go into finance.
Yeah.
Music, I like to listen to music, but I will eventually, when I retire, probably go back to my music because there's only so many hours in the day. On my sports side, I did continue my sport, but in a different way. I talk about this in my second TED Talk, where I decided I wanted the excitement. Finance isn't really exciting as such, so I needed that engagement. And what happened was I found fundraising challenges. Now, what I mean by that is I'm a big supporter of, the English word's quite long, philanthropic, i.e. raising money for good causes. My mother had Alzheimer's, dementia, and passed away with the condition, and I'm an Alzheimer's ambassador in the UK. Here in Bulgaria, Duke of Edinburgh Award, as well as I support the For Our Children Foundation, an organisation I've just completed a big challenge which we'll talk about.
Yeah.
But going back to those early days, I would set myself a big challenge every year. Now, in the early days, it was run a marathon. I ran the New York Marathon in 2006. I ran the London Marathon a few years later. I climbed Kilimanjaro. I decided, and I didn't like water, I decided to kayak the length of the Thames.
Wow.
And each time I would think at Christmas, what crazy challenge can I do next year? One year was particularly special. I decided to trek to Everest. Now, that should have been an exercise that would have taken 3 to 4 weeks, but something happened on Everest. In 2015, there was a 7.8 magnitude earthquake, and I was on Mount Everest.
Wow.
So some people died around us. There were 17 people died at base camp and 9,000 people across Nepal. And in doing that, it didn't make me stronger. Well, it did in a way, because surviving that, my wife sent me a text basically thinking I was dead. Some of my friends who were further up climbing Mount Everest, they got back sooner because they got helicoptered. But for 4 days, we were trekking back and we didn't know the devastation. Now, I look back on those days. I don't think about those days because we all saw some bad things, but it's another piece in the chapter and the story, which I will write one day, of building a strength of character, and I've had other instances like that, but the Everest thing was a story that made me cherish and value life, because I could have been one of those that perished, and I didn't, thankfully, because we were on flat ground, whereas other people had rocks landing on them and stuff like that. So I'm I get up every morning, and I'm here today, I've got other things lined up. I do have a zest for life, to maximise life in all the different things I'm involved in.
This is a massive life-changing experience. What have changed for you?
Well, on a funny note, an amusing note, I wouldn't recommend this, but I was fundraising for the Alzheimer's Society, and at the time I'd raised about £5,000, which in Lev is about 12,000 Lev.
Yeah.
When people thought I was dead, the money came in. So I went from £5,000 to £25,000. So if anyone wants a way to raise more money, let the world think you're dead, and there's lots of money in it. But that's on the jokey side.
Yeah.
On a more serious note, I genuinely look at life and think, we all have, I had an older sister who passed away at only age 36 back in the 90s. I've had other death and other friends pass away far too early. That event in itself didn't make me cherish life, but it certainly filled up my bottle of water that said, I thought I valued life then, but I value life even more now because of that experience. And, the spin-off of that event was, there was a gentleman, and his name, all my family and friends know him. His name is Sukhman, and he'll probably be watching this podcast at some point. And Sherpas Sukhman himself got us down safely. And 2 years later, I'm being emotional as I say this. In May the 4th, when we left Kathmandu, and then I flew to India and then flew home to my loved ones, I promised him I would bring him to England for my family and my friends to thank him for saving my life, along with the others. And in 2017, I flew him to the UK.
Wow.
Along with, the surprise was, we had some Canadian climbers with us. They joined us.
Wow.
And what happened was, we did a big fundraising for his village. We visited London. We went to some West End shows. We gave him 10 days in England he would never forget. But it was a big thank you to say he thought his brother was dead, his family and his village was destroyed, but me and my wife regularly give him money every year because Nepal, for those of you who know anything about the country, it's one of the 5 poorest countries. So that additional thing gave me an appreciation of what we see as very little money makes a massive difference in other countries. And I've experienced that this year going to Botswana, where I donated some bits. So the more I travel, the more I realise, whether it be living in Bulgaria, in the UK, or the other places I've visited, how there are parts of the world where just a small part from our pockets can make a massive difference in those other countries. And so, it's something I continue to cherish.
Yeah, I want to talk about charity more, but let's talk about this experience on Mount Everest for a bit. Do you remember it in details? Do you remember the first moment you felt like something is wrong?
Yeah, I have told this story a few times, and it's only on occasions like this that I sort of have to go into the memory banks. I don't try and blank it out, but we had got, the full story is, and this is how, certainly in my life, things change for a reason. So I was due to go to Nepal 2 weeks earlier. So had I gone 2 weeks earlier, I'd have missed all this. So the company I was going with, a company called Exodus, they changed the date, which had a positive spin to it, because a gentleman who introduced me to Everest, a guy called Ellis, again, Ellis is well known in sort of the climbing community. He was going to the top. I wasn't going to the top. I was going to base camp to sleep on the Kumbu Icefall for 2 days. I managed to meet him on April the 23rd, and I've got pictures with him. Now, meeting someone who's climbing to the top is like meeting someone going to the moon. You're not supposed to touch them because you may give them a cold and it may ruin their trip to the top. And remember, it's $50,000. So
I didn't know that.
We met him. We did embrace. He did embrace us, and he met my friends. Because the people I was climbing with didn't know me beforehand. So we met, and the next day we did a tour of the base camp. The base camp has more than 2,000 people. Not all of them are climbing the mountain, and that was the 24th. On the 25th of April, we were ready to leave base camp. Ellis was already up at Camp 2. So we left, and we headed south, and we got to a place called Gora Shep. And either we were leaving or we just left. And I'll always remember it was 11:53 a.m. and literally we were on a flat piece of the glacier, and all of a sudden it moved. Everything was moving. Now, it's hard to describe it, but it was like a fairground ride or a ride at an amusement park. You're like this and you're thinking, you can't, it was 7.8 magnitude. So when everything's moving, then you heard the noise. It was like a bomb, and Everest behind us had moved by 2 meters. There were avalanches, and it's the famous avalanche, unfortunately, that 17 people perished. But as that noise started to sound, Sukhman at the front, it took him a delay. He shouted, "Get on the floor." So we were on the floor, and suddenly your brain's, this has got to be an earthquake. It can't be anything else. It wasn't a landslide and stuff like that. And then it stopped. We got up, looked at each other, and I always say this to people, because we weren't in a city with houses. Had we been down in Kathmandu, there would have been buildings falling. All we had was rock. Now, we didn't know if that rock had moved there, but everything had moved. We gathered our thoughts, we checked our phones, there was no signal, there was nothing. We knew that outside of that place, I think we were about 5,000 meters, more than, 15,000 feet up. We didn't know what had gone on. So we started to trek down, and we knew, there were the small buildings we saw were completely destroyed. And we then started giving, the company I was with was so good, and this is why when I give talks on this, one of the things I always say, whatever situation is, make sure you've got a plan B, because Sukhman in his backpack brought out a book that said, what do I do with a tsunami? What do I do with a hurricane? What do I do in an earthquake? So we had our list of things to do. So when we got further down, we then had another aftershock of about 6.4. We then had to sleep outside. Also, the first time we slept underneath, we had to sleep with our shoes on. So if there was another aftershock, we could run quickly. There were just loads of things that we did. But it was harrowing for 4 days because at any moment, the aftershocks could move the rocks and you could die because of the rocks and stuff.
But how you go asleep knowing that anything can happen?
No, for 4 days we weren't. Firstly, there was a relief that none of us died because we did. One of the things that was quite harrowing was in that part of the world, the religion says, or the custom is, you don't kill animals. So there were cows in pain, and you could hear them in pain. They were screaming, and I always remember that. But when I think back, it was the few times I heard those noises. I can hear it in my head now. They couldn't kill them because you're not supposed to kill animals. Oh, wow. So they were having a slow death. We did see some fires where people's bodies were being burnt because that's the custom over there. And one of the most harrowing things, and I don't even think I've told many people this. I remember I was going around the corner of a village where there was no cement holding up the bricks. The bricks had all fallen. And there was obviously a wife, a sister or a mother, and she was just next to the body of obviously her loved one, and she was absolutely in tears. I just think back to it. It just, just getting emotional thinking about it. That seeing that, how that could have been us. That could have been my wife, my mother. It could have been anyone. But it wasn't us. And at least one of us, I didn't. I think one of the nurses, there was 2 nurses in our group. I think they may have gone over and comforted her. But you asked me a question earlier about how did it change the preciousness of life in that one shot. Just really sort of. So when we got back to Kathmandu, we then understood the devastation because everything, even we stayed in a hotel, but the hotel itself. You could see there were cracks in the wall and everything. This 7.8 magnitude. I know here in Bulgaria, I think the biggest has been 6.4 or something, but 7.8 is big. And when we got on the planes, it was mainly Canadians. There were 6 of us Canadians, and there were 3 Canadians and 3 Brits. We were very lucky, and one of the things certainly I did, and I think the others did as well. Every piece of equipment we had, we just handed over and said, you need this more. We literally just left with 1 pair of clothing. We just gave them everything that we could because when we left them, we felt a bit guilty because as much as we wanted to see our loved ones, we left people there who their lives, they're still rebuilding it now. It's the 10th anniversary this year. And thankfully, our good friend Sukman shows us pictures of how they've rebuilt the village. We've sent money and they've grown, they're getting back to normal, but that earthquake could happen tomorrow. Yeah. So, and they rely on tourists. Remember, after this earthquake, there was no more mountain climbing in Everest, certainly for that year. So yeah, it was a period in my life where I did challenge myself to say, should I do this again? But I did. And my next mountain after that, I did another mountain soon after, Elbrus, the highest mountain in Europe, which is in Russia. Thankfully, no earthquakes. On a similar theme to Everest, and this is where I have a number of friends and family and stuff who say to me, find out where Tony's going on a holiday and don't go there. So soon after university, I had a job secured in London as an accountant. But I had 5-6 months to kill. And some of my friends went to America to teach football and blah, blah, blah. I went to the library, as you did in those days, without the internet. And I found, do you know what? I'm going to go to a kibbutz in Israel. I'm not Jewish, I'm a Catholic, brought up a Catholic, so I knew nothing about, Israel. I knew about Israel because as a Catholic, I learnt about Jerusalem. I learnt about the Via Dolorosa, which is the route that Jesus took, the Garden of Gethsemane, the Mount Olives. I knew all about the history, but just as a Catholic, being brought up, by nuns and stuff like that in my early years. So I travelled to Israel at the end of July 1990. Little did I know, within 5 days, Saddam Hussein invaded Kuwait. And when he invaded Kuwait, everyone left the kibbutz apart from me. I had Finnish people, there were Dutch people, there's a Brazilian, they all went back to their countries. I thought, hey there, I'm supposed to be here. So I took the crazy decision to put my bag on my back and I backpacked around Egypt and parts of Israel. By that time, the war hadn't developed as big, the Scud missiles weren't coming over and stuff like that. But that in itself gave me an amazing experience. I backpacked all the way down to the Nile, to the bottom of Egypt, the border with Sudan. I then climbed technically my first mountain. My first mountain was Mount Sinai. Mount Sinai is the very famous mountain that Moses climbed and then he found his 10 commandments. So I did that. During that period, I did go to Gaza, which I know is a hot point at the moment in the world.
Yeah.
I went to the West Bank, Ramallah, and I also crazily visited the Golan Heights and Syria, and that's the touch point that's in that part of the world. So I wouldn't necessarily go there today, but a bit like Everest, I think on my journey through life, it gave me a rigor and a robustness. I value life and I value my life. But as a 20-year-old at the time, I didn't dismiss the risks. But when you're 20-year-old, you do things you probably don't do as an older person. And that's why I say, I wouldn't do it now, I don't think. But certainly in those days, I look back on that and think to myself, that was like another Everest in a different way. Yeah. So I do somehow get involved. But as I go back to my original point, when you get up in the morning, you can choose to live a life. You've obviously got your job to do, you've got your family to bring up and stuff, but I love planning what the next adventure is. And, I do have next year in 26, I've got various climbs and challenges that I'm going to do with some of my friends simply because it challenges me to be a better person, the fundraising that I do and some of the awareness raising I do for the work that I do.
You have mentioned guilt. Where is the line between guilt and gratitude?
I go back to my point. I value life. In terms of guilt, I often mention this, when you get up in the morning, and we all know somewhere in the world there are people passing.
Yeah. There
are people who, unfortunately, it could be a bus that's run over them, it could be through illness, it could be whatever. And I'm not as philosophical, I'm not in this way, but if it's your time, it's your time, and, whether it be on Everest or whether it be in the Gulf War. The Gulf War, I wasn't obviously at the front line, but there were things going on there which were dangerous. Retrospectively, I was mad to have travelled the way I did, but I survived. But I certainly don't have pangs of guilt, because if we constantly look at things and think we can't do that and we can't do that because of this, we would just sit in our homes and do nothing. So I know there's a difference between what someone's guilty pleasure, if I use the two words. Some of the stuff I do, people look at me and say, Tony, should you be doing that? At your age, what your experience? And my question back is, why shouldn't I? It's there to be challenged. And I've got a number of sort of people I look up to, particularly back in my home country. I mean, a gentleman who's recently lost his wife in the UK is Richard Branson. Now, Richard Branson is someone who, and I'm not saying I agree with everything he does, but if you read anything about him, he was a guy who was born with dyslexia.
Yeah.
He was a guy that basically got thrown out of school. Mm-hmm. He was a guy that set up his multi-billion Virgin Empire by selling student magazine, and he literally camped outside the politician's home to try and get the latest stories. He then signed up musicians. He then did this. If Richard Branson didn't think like many people, that's only a small minority probably do, we wouldn't have the Virgin Empire that we have today. And I just think if the world was 8 billion people of Richard Bransons, we'd have a crazy zoo. But I think we need those sort of inspirational figures to trigger and make us go beyond. And it's a very old tale, isn't it? Moving outside your comfort zone. And people say that to me. Tony said, as a leader, you often say that to us. And I do. Moving outside your comfort zone. So.
And do you consider Everest as an open chapter?
No. And that's a really good example. I regard myself as fit for my age, But Everest, I have this conversation with my friend Ellis, who has written a book about this, the guy who got stuck at Camp 2. He attempted it a few times, and his book is about, you know, it's not about the summit. In fact, his new book's coming out next year, whereas I'm writing the foreword, and I talk about, it's like it's a story, a chapter. Not getting to the top is not necessarily a bad thing, because that's part of the journey he's taken. Same with me. I do not profess to being the sort of person who can go to 8,800 meters. I would have to leave my job for a year, train hard, spend $50,000. That's not something for me. But there are other challenges out there. You know, for example, I've recently, since moving to Bulgaria, I could not swim. So up to the age of 50 plus, I was not a swimmer. Since coming to, and people find that fascinating, I set my challenge a few years ago to swim. So now I've learned to swim. I did my first short course triathlon this year. Very short. So I did a swim in a pool, I then cycled and I ran. Eventually, and I'm hoping it's going to be in 26, I want to do an open water triathlon. Now, for somebody who did not like the water, remember, I did the kayak, didn't like the water. I lived in Australia where there were great white sharks. I am not a fan of the sea, but I've set myself the challenge, not because I'm crazy, but because I want to challenge myself to say, I can do that.
Yeah, what do you want to accomplish by doing these challenges to yourself?
Well, in all I do, and we'll get onto my fundraising, I always, in the early years, I'm not saying, certainly in the early years, not everyone was doing a marathon. A lot of people run marathons now, and you could say, what's the next thing? They're doing Ironmans, they're doing ultras, they're doing everything. I like to choose different challenges, and I remember years ago in the UK saying this to someone who was interviewing me. I want someone to read the challenge and say, that's different. You know, it turns a head that says, oh, it's not this, it's not that. It needs to sort of, not necessarily excite people, but, you know, my recent challenge here in Bulgaria over the last 3 years is to climb the 56 peaks above 2,500 meters. Now, that in itself creates an inquisitive mind that says, oh, what's this about? Oh, I didn't know there were 56 peaks. I didn't know that. And doing that, for me, the triathlon isn't doing that because a lot of people do, not a lot.
Already,
The people are already doing the triathlon, but that one is more personal. I want to be able to say to myself, not anyone else, that I've done a triathlon. And 3 years ago, I couldn't swim. And that to me is a personal triumph.
Yeah, growing as a person.
Yeah.
And tell us more about the 56 Peaks challenge.
56
How it started.
Well, it is. And I recently shared the story in my TEDx talk here in 2025 in Bulgaria. So if I take you back, so we'd just come out of COVID in 2021. And after the COVID, I'll always remember, I was invited to a charity auction in Sofia. And it was for a organisation called the For Our Children Foundation.
Yeah.
And bearing in mind, I'd spent the last 15, 20 years doing all these crazy challenges. I moved to Bulgaria, I just climbed Mount Elbrus in 18, and I went through a period of getting stuck into my job, that was the important thing, here in Bulgaria. And then we hit COVID in 2020. So we had like an 18-month, 2-year period where I couldn't do what I wanted to do back in the UK, was to do a new challenge. So what sparked was, I think it was November or December 21, I went to this event, and as I'm walking home, from the event, I then thought to myself, do you know what? I like what the For Our Children Foundation are doing, supporting disadvantaged children in Bulgaria. And I just thought, what challenge could I do? In my mind, I was going, should I do a marathon? No, I've done them, Maybe a kayak. My kayak isn't here, but it's still back in the UK. Maybe I cycle. Cycling in Bulgaria is not safe. So I thought, and then it suddenly dawned on me, Vitosha or Chernova is literally looking down on me. And I said, great. So I did a bit of research. 30% of Bulgaria is covered in mountains. And this is where Wikipedia isn't always great. I looked at Wikipedia, and just in Wikipedia it said there are 56 peaks above 2,500 meters. And I thought, do you know what? There's my challenge. So within a week, I'd literally approached the charity and said, look, you don't know who I am. I was at your event last week. I've got an idea. In 2022, I want to launch this challenge. And I was going to do it on my own. A lot of my challenges I've done on my own. The biggest challenge up to that point I'd done was I cycled from the bottom of England to the top of Scotland, 2,000 kilometres with 6 friends.
Wow.
And that raised a lots of money. That was a 14-day challenge. This one I was going to do was going to spend, I thought at the time, 1 year. So I approached them and they looked at me in that sort of cynical Bulgarian face and said, who is this guy? So what then happened was I decided I'm going to start this in May 2022. But within the space of a few weeks, some of my colleagues at work said, do you know what, we want a bit of that, Tony, can we even buy? So a lady named Vessi, said to me, my other half, Martin, is really keen on joining you. Now, this was a great exchange. We went to lunch or dinner and I met Martin, and Martin clearly told me the 56 Peaks wasn't going to be an easy one. There were some easier ones, there were some challenging ones like Vichron, and there's some technical ones where you need ropes, helmets and stuff like that. So I realised quite quickly, I can't do this on my own. So Martin agreed to join me. We created a brand, the 56 Peaks. We had blue tops, we had a QR code. So there was me, Martin, and about 5 others. And in May 2022, we started with Bell McKen. And then what happened was, over the preceding months, I realised 56 peaks, there are 52 weeks in the year. Unless I do 5 or 10 peaks a weekend, it's going to take more than a year. So in that first year, I then started to build up an email distribution list to people who I met in my business network and said, oh, send us an email about this. So I built up a list. Over 3 years, the list became 800 people.
Wow.
And in that time, between the start of the 56 peaks and 40 months later, the final peak in September 2025 was Musala, the highest peak in Bulgaria.
How many months?
40 months. So over 3 years later,
wow.
I had over 100 people over those 20 different nationalities. We climbed 75,000 meters in those 56 peaks. That's the equivalent of 22 Mount Everests.
Wow.
But, and there's a few buts in there. Firstly, for those listening to this podcast, some of the eagle-eyed will say there's more than 56 peaks above 2.5, and there is. I think there's over 80, but I blame that Wikipedia search. It was wrong. But by that time, I'd created the brand. I had a cup with 56 peaks. I had a bandana. I had the top. The second thing is, and I talk about me being involved in crazy situations. I had the earthquake. I had the Gulf War. Well, last year, in July 2024, I travelled to the Philippines for my job.
Yeah.
And there was a hurricane, typhoon. And in the middle of that typhoon, I was rushed to hospital. And in the middle of that, I had my gallbladder removed. So I had to spend the best part of 3 to 4 weeks in Manila in the height of the summer. So I wasted, some may say not wasted because they fixed my gallbladder. I missed the summer of 24. So maybe the 40 months
maybe
would have been
missed
only
is the better word than wasted.
Missed,
yeah.
not wasted. So there has been some bumps in the road. And as I say to friends and others, yes, it was 40 months, but there were at least 10 weekends when we went to the mountains. We had to turn back because of the weather, because anyone who's involved in mountains will know. In Sofia, we could have sunshine, but if you go to Pirin or Rilla and you're at 2,000 meters, once the weather comes in and it's rainy, you cannot be climbing those mountains in rain. So many times we had to turn back. So, we saw some amazing sights. The coldest we got to was probably -20. The hottest was +35. So many people say to me, I've seen more of Bulgaria than many Bulgarians. And I'll always remember one gentleman who will remain nameless, but he knows who he is. We stood looking down on the Rilla Lakes, and he was 50 years old roughly, and he said to me, Tony, you're a Brit, I'm a Bulgarian, I've never seen the Rilla Lakes, the 7 Rilla Lakes.
Wow.
So he said, he shook my hand and he said, it took a Brit to take me to a national heritage site, as in the 7 Rilla Lakes. So at the end of all this, we raised the best part of 20,000 lev for the NGO. And with regards to that, whenever I raise in the past, my marathons and that, it's not just the money, it's the awareness raising. So me, my team and the brand, which is now a bit of a brand, the 56 Peaks, I think we've done a great service to this organisation, and they do some really good stuff for disadvantaged children, whether it be fostering children, whether it be disabled children, etc., etc.
I know you wanted to bring also like the Sherpa Sukman here to Bulgaria.
Yeah.
Did you manage to do that?
No, we didn't. So that's a really good point. So I chose about a year ago to do my final. So we had a deadline. Going into 2025, I think we had probably 15 more peaks. We'd hit about 40 at the end of 24. So we had 15 peaks plus Musala. We were always going to end with Musala. So I chose September the 4th, 2025 as my final date. For one reason, September the 4th, I celebrated 30 years at my company. So it was 30 years at my company. It was the end of the 56 peaks. And the third point was Sherpa Sukman was going to fly over and climb the final peak with me with my Bulgarian flag, him with his Nepalese. And this is where the importance of his life and family back in Nepal. I spoke to the company he works for, an English company he works for in Nepal. They said, Tony, unfortunately, your date of the 4th doesn't work for us. We need Sukman to take a trek into the Indian mountains. And I said to Sukman, I FaceTime him, which is always bizarre. I FaceTime him from Bulgaria to Nepal and said, Sukman, unfortunately, I'm going to have to say no to you because I don't want you to lose your job. You need to focus on your job. You'll come to Bulgaria another year and we'll climb mountains together.
So we're waiting to see him here.
Yeah.
And when you are doing like 3 years of climbing the mountains, is there something that you are afraid of, that you are going to feel, that you're going to experience after ending the challenge?
Anything I fear about the ending the challenge? I always know, well, as I get older, the fear is these legs, this body won't take me there anymore. And I ran the Sofia, I ran the South Park 5 kilometers a few months ago, and I've got a niggling left knee. Touch wood, wherever it is. I've not had any bad injuries in my sporting life.
Yeah.
This is the worst I've probably felt. I can run a bit, but I have a niggling left knee. So I fear that in my head wants to do these challenges, but my body says, that's enough, Tony. So that's a fear. I don't have many fears at all, in the sense that I still have a fear for open water. So when I do finally do a triathlon with open water, that will be a fear that I have to overcome. But in terms of the mountains, the one thing that I always say to people, and I've got 2 main logistics guys. I've got the original Martin and a secondary guy who's been involved more recently is Georgi, and both of them very much the same. When we go into the mountains, as we did those 10 times, if the weather's not right, if there's another reason, we have to say no. We have to say, Tony and team, you're not climbing. Because unfortunately, one weekend we did one of the peaks and it involved ropes and everything. And as we came down the mountain, we saw the mountain rescue people coming up. And we found out the next day, I think it was a German tourist, just near where we were, they slipped and they dropped 1,000 feet. And again, that tells you how important it is, health and safety. You've only got one chance. So I always say, it's like riding a bike. If I rode a bike in Bulgaria, which I do have a new bike recently that I'm going to do on the roads away from Sofia, you've only got to be unlucky once and get hit by a lorry. Same in the mountains. You've only got to slip once and that could be it's over. So the fear is that I or the team decide to be not health conscious, health and safety conscious. We have to be. That's the preservation of life. I want to continue to live life into my retirement, and being reckless is not going to allow that.
You have a cause for every challenge, you have a charity cause or something. Is that your way to show gratitude to the world and to celebrate that you have accomplished it?
If I go back to the beginning, as I said, I'll always remember when I was a kid at school, we did a 10-mile walk, and we all raised some money, in those days, a few pounds, and it went
Who introduced you to fundraising?
Well, that was the first one, the school. But then I'll always remember with 2 friends, and technically, this was like my second mountain. In England and in Britain, our mountains are smaller than here in Bulgaria, but the highest mountain in the whole of the United Kingdom is in Scotland, called Ben Nevis. And I remember there was a fundraising, in England there's something called the Heart Foundation, the British Heart Foundation, obviously for people with heart problems and stuff. And it was a winter climb, and with two people from my company all those years ago in the 90s, we decided to join this group. We paid our fee and we also fundraised. So I think that was my first big fundraiser. And I got great joy knowing that what I did as fun, climbing the mountain, also people would pay me to do that challenge. Now, I come from a country where I always joke, when you run the London Marathon in London, every second person is dressed up as a carrot, I don't know, Fred Flintstone, Scooby-Doo, you know, they're dressed up as Batman, Superman, a centipede. Everyone dresses up in crazy gear. Less so in America, where I've done the New York Marathon, less so here in Bulgaria, where I've done the Wizz Air. I've taken part in the Wizz Air Marathon in a 10K. So I come from a country where philanthropy, I'm not saying we don't raise money here, we do, but in the UK, it's more, you know, there's the annual telethon on TV. There's a culture of it.
Yeah.
Now, building on that culture, around 2006, I discovered my mother had dementia. And rather than sit back, I wasn't going to try and solve dementia for the world. And I thought, how could I do something? So I entered the New York Marathon in 2006 for Alzheimer's. I paid my flight, paid my hotel, paid everything, and we raised money. And then I got into the idea in 2007. I climbed Kilimanjaro. 2008, I did a crazy challenge. I ran the Paris Marathon. I cycled from Paris to London and then ran the London Marathon. And again, that's when I got the idea, the crazier the challenge, the more interested people are.
Yeah.
And that's where, and after a while, it got, every year I was doing something different. It was only broken by soon after Everest, when I had to take a bit of a break because I had a reality check, and also during COVID. So if you ask me to pinpoint it, I get great joy in not only doing it myself, but getting other people. So one of the things I often get asked, why do you do what you do in terms of all this crazy stuff? And I mentioned this in my recent TED talk. Often you're asked what you do and how you do it. But I've come to learn, why am I doing it?
Yeah.
Why do I get up on a Saturday morning at 4 o'clock to pick up a group of crazy friends? We drive to Bangsko to climb one of the big mountains there, and we watch the sun go up.
And soon to Burgas for swimming.
Soon, yeah. I need to try and swim from Anastasia to Burgas. That's one of my challenges for the future. But going back to Bangsko, when I go there in the morning, why am I doing that? Why? I then reflect on the 3-year challenge or 40-month challenge of the 56 peaks, and I have a really good sense of, nobody had heard of something called the 56 peaks. Not many people had heard of the For Our Children Foundation. Not many people, I've now got a community of people who I know. So, you know, it's a very simple example. We recently moved to an apartment from Lozenets, and I had to search around. I contacted my 56 Peaks team, and immediately they were there. They said, boss, what help do you need and stuff? Now, you could say they were just friends, but the community that's been built is absolutely amazing. And I know there are different people who are parts of different communities, but we are now focusing on our new challenge, which I can talk about, is the Balkan 6 Peaks. So we're now on to our next challenge, but going back on it, that sense of bringing people together. So often I'm seen as a bit of a loner. I did the marathons on my own, I did the kayaking on my own, but in recent years, I have understood my why. Simon Sinek says that. He said, often the inner feeling about why someone does things isn't what they do or how they do it, it's that deeper meaning as to why they do it. And I know now why I do it. Not because there aren't other people in Bulgaria. I've met other people like me who are doing what they're doing, but I'm doing it the Tony way. And I'm doing it via the challenges, making people's attention, enjoying it while I do it, getting to see parts of Bulgaria that I would never have seen had I just been a tourist or someone living in Bulgaria.
When you decided to go on this challenge, did you know that there is the power to make that community as well? No.
I'm very fortunate that the position I've held here in Bulgaria in the business community, either in my job or in some of the organisations, I hold a senior position, but I don't abuse that seniority. When I'm in the mountains, everyone is equal. In fact, I'm probably the slowest in the group, and I'm getting abuse from the, come on, Tony, you need to, and they use colourful English words and to really push me. And I don't see that as disrespect. I see that as a very neutralising. But to answer your question, when I see the power of what we've achieved, in no way did when we did Bell McKen, there was probably 5 or 6 of us, and I remember it seemed such a long time ago. The snow had just melted. There was still a little bit of snow. There was fog up there. I had no inclination that I'd build it so it would be 100 people, 20 different languages, that when I'd go into a networking event, often people would ask, what's your next peak, Tony? Can I go on the next? People would be chatting to me about the 56 peaks. I wasn't there about the 56 peaks. It created a discussion point, and it was helped by my email distribution and stuff. But yeah, I'm very proud of what we have created. It's not just me. Call me the head of this group, call me the catalyst, but every person plays their part, and that's what I like. And it's whether it's the person who chose the blue tops, whether it be the routes we've taken. I often mention to some people there were a couple of instances. There were a couple of instances that really highlight the 56 peaks for me. The first one, when we got to peak about 48, 49, we went to, it's quite a remote peak called Kamenitsa. And Kamenitsa has a hut down next to the lake.
Yeah.
The gentleman called Ivan runs this hut. He's run it for 40 years, does not speak a word of English. So I walk in to the hut and the team are around me. He sees the top, it's bright summer, they can see the blue top, he reads the top, he asks a few of the Bulgarians, what's this about? And once he realised what we were doing, he literally pulled out his wallet, he took out 2 50 lev notes, he handed me them, and he hugged me.
Oh.
And there was no English translation. I knew what he was doing, and he knew what I was doing. That night, and it was interesting, I drank homemade Bulgarian red wine with Ivan and all his buddies. Only a few of them spoke English, but it was as if the connection didn't need any translation. I knew what I was doing there, he knew what I was doing there, and that to me summed up the 56 peaks. But there's an even bigger story, and I have to mention a guy called Dimitar. There were 20 of us on the last peak in September 25 when we climbed Musala. Now Musala, anyone who's climbed it, it's not the hardest of peaks, but it is the highest peak in Bulgaria, so it has the status. Personally, I would like Vikran to be the highest peak, because I think Vikran is worthy of a highest peak, but it's not, it's a bit shorter. So, we're going up in the cable car to about, I think it was 2000 or 2002, and I noticed there was a gentleman chatting to the team. This gentleman was called Dimitar, I didn't know him, and we had our first stop at the lake, he's chatting and stuff, and I got to understand, he was a bit like Ivan, he was asking, but in English, he could speak English. And, Dimitar then followed us all the way up to the top. And in fact, when we got to the top, it was Dimitar who took the photo of the 20 of us. Anyway, we come back down. I started finding out, Dimitar works here in the medical profession. Really, what I remember, big beard, looked very Bulgarian, and a big smile. I thought, this is a really nice guy in that. And he found out that night we had a celebration. But again, he'd only just literally met us. So he'd taken a day off to climb the highest peak. And this is where sometimes the stars are aligned. So we all arrived back in Sofia. And I was very fortunate to invite Marina Sakova, the Nova TV presenter. She hosted a small celebration at the charity's headquarters. So we're about to start the evening. Then out of the corner of my eye, Dimitar arrived, smiling. So Dimitar had changed his plans and decided to arrive. He'd found out from one of the team. I didn't necessarily invite him. He arrived. I went over and said, Dimitar, you're here. He said, Tony, I'm a 56 peaker now. I've done the 56 peak with you. I know I might not be in the picture, but he took the picture. I embraced him, and I say to people, on the very last day of the 56 peaks challenge, Dimitar looked at what we were doing, how we were doing it, but I go back to what I said earlier, why we were doing it. He literally embraced it, and within the space of 12 hours, somebody we didn't know that morning, he was now my 101st person, my 101. So Dimitar to me, along with Ivan, sums up what the 56 Peaks is about, i.e. this small idea that started in the autumn of 2021 had suddenly grown to this. And that's why, as I sit here today after very successfully finishing the year and the 56 Peaks, I'm now looking to next year when we're now going to commence with our new challenge.
When there is a community already, I believe that when you are low of energy, or maybe you lose the motivation for a while, you get it back from the community. But before that, where you find energy to keep going and going with everything?
I'm often asked that. Part of me thinks genetics. I'm a redhead. Redhead people are usually fiery.
Yeah.
They are fiery. As I said, role models, you know, I'm not saying it's all about Richard Branson. There are lots of other people I look up to. But
what's the earliest role model of yours?
It's interesting. I mentioned this at a dinner I went to last night. In 1984, I was a teenager, and the Los Angeles Olympics was on. And a gentleman by the name of Carl Lewis at the Los Angeles Olympics won 4 gold medals in Los Angeles. And because of the time difference, I had to stay up overnight till 4 in the morning to watch him and all the others competing. And I'll always remember watching him long jumping, which is the sport I eventually did. And the way he went around his business, firstly, he was the best there was. He was like the Usain Bolt of his time back in the 80s. He's somebody that I looked up to from a person I could see on the screen. He was thousands of miles away, and I actually visited, through my work, I managed to visit Santa Monica a few times, which was the club he ran for. So that was the first one. My role model would also be my mother. My mother, coming from a Celtic Scottish background, she brought up a family on her own of 4 children, just on her own. You know, I didn't really know my father that well, and he left the family home. So my mother was a really big role model. And the third person, who sadly passed away only 2 months ago, was my music teacher, Daphne. Daphne passed away aged 96. So she had a really good, as we say in England, a really good innings, a really good life. And she was like my second mother. She was someone who wasn't part of my circle, but as I went into, when I left school, I went to university, I then went into my first job, and in more recent years, before, you know, she became ill and obviously old age beat her, she was the one who was asking me questions about technology, but she would speak to me through the lens of someone born in the 1920s, which is so refreshing given the technology that's all around us. So it's not directly answering your question, but the answer is through those various influences, whether it be the people you see on TV, you know, I had a lot of other friends around me who were sort of go-getters. I did come from humble beginnings, so I wasn't presented with stuff. You know, I've had to work my way through, and I think I was lucky to have some early successes. And once you have early successes, you then want to have more success, you know, whether it be your personal life, your career, the challenges. It's what's the next thing? What's the next thing? So for some people, they often say to me, Tony, where do you get this passion from? And I'm not someone, you know, if I go on holiday, I'm not someone to sit still on a beach. That's what I'd say.
Yeah, it's a nature.
Yeah.
Kind
so
of.
it's inside me.
Yeah. Do you think that any of us can make a big difference by what in the world?
Yeah, I mean, there's a phrase, isn't there? You know, if the elephant's in the room, rather than try and eat the elephant in one go, you need to eat it in bits. So the idea being is a bit like what I said in the port. I mean, I'm not here to ask everyone to give money to the third world, but I'm here to say, through collective team effort, if one person's trying to do it, they may have the funds or the force to do it, but the connection, I go back to my 56 Peaks, having 100 people join me made this so much easier because it wasn't just me carrying it, the whole team. The whole team saw it as their challenge, not just mine. So that collective, so, you know, whether it be, you know, political unrest as we have some in Bulgaria at the moment, whether it be a project at work, whether it be anything. When you've got a collective group all pushing in the right direction. Look at some of the best sports teams in the world, you know, whether it be in football, the Real Madrids and Man United, who are not doing so well at the moment, whether it be in other sports, when you've got the Bulgarian volleyball team, dare I say, when you have that collective gathering, all moving in the same direction, we are, as a human beings, I think the collective direction, if we're all communicating with each other and going for the same cause, it's so powerful.
Sometimes we are led by our ego, we want to be the change, but the truth is that we can be part of the change, only part of the change, and then everything will happen.
It's really good you say that, because as much as I wanted to be the best long jumper in the world, I wanted to be Britain's Carl Lewis, I quickly realised, and even friends around me, many of my friends went to the Barcelona Olympics of '92. Unfortunately, I wasn't strong enough, I wasn't quick enough. Even they, such a small percentage of people in the world get to the very top of whatever they're doing, whether it be sport, whether it be politics, whether it be finance. And at some point you need to resign yourself to the fact that I'm not going to be that person at the top of the peak or the top of the tower. You're going to be one of the foot soldiers, whatever level you're at. And once you recognise that, I think you just need to be the best that you can be in the area that you sit. Because you can't have everyone at the top, it'd be a zoo. Yeah. You know, you can't have everyone at the top, you know, leading. But that's where I am, again, apologies for referring back to Richard Branson. He always said he may be the top of his organisation, but he tries to employ a load of people around him who are smarter at what they do. I.e., the analogy I always give is, I personally could try and fix my car, but I'm not a car mechanic. I take it to a car mechanic specialist, because that's what their job is. You know, I could cut my hair. Not that I would, but I go to my friend Daniel at Headhunters over in Lozenets. We could all try our hands and be a jack of all trades, but there are specialists around us. So in answer to your question, everyone's got their speciality. They don't have to be the person at the top. Often the best politicians, you know, I don't know if Ronald Reagan was the best politician, but he had a really good team around him in the 1980s as the President of the United States. So having a good team around, as long as you don't have that ego where you have to be the number one, if you've got the people around you, I'm not saying they make you look good, but they make the collective, going back to my point before, they make the collective team far stronger.
Yeah, and if we look at it from a different perspective, you can be on the top, but not on the same top as anyone else. There are so many
there are so many different tops.
And you have mentioned the unexpected surgery that you go through. Yeah. Can we talk a little bit about that? Because this was like a forced break for your dream.
It was. So I personally have never been to hospital at all, apart from to visit other people. And what happened was, I'll always remember, in my previous role, which changed late last year, I used to travel to the Philippines 2 or 3 times a year. Mm-hmm. I had a planned trip to the Philippines. And at some point just before that trip, I had a bit of a movement in my stomach, and it was a bit of a pain. It was like, I would describe it as toothache, but down here. And I thought,
you have ignored it?
No, I went to Takuda. And for the first time ever, I was put on a drip, and they gave me some stuff. They gave me some stuff to make the pain go away. Mm-hmm. What I didn't realise, that was just a short-term thing. So I got on a plane. Thank God my gallbladder didn't burst while I was on the plane. I landed in Manila, knowing there was a hurricane. Again, wherever I go, there's something happening. Our offices were flooded, so I had to go back to the hotel. So within 24 hours of being in the hotel, I'm actually in bed. This isn't going away. In fact, this is I always smile at this point, which I can do now. The swimming pool in our hotel, the Shangri-La I think it's called, 27th floor, had an outdoor pool. Remember, Manila's very warm, it's over 30 degrees. I decided to go swimming to sort of see if my something what was wrong would move and go away. These lifeguards are looking at me saying, "Sir, it's a hurricane and you want to go swimming." So I said, "Look, I just want to go swimming." The pool was open. I went swimming, and for like 5 minutes, everything seemed to be okay. I thought, great. Anyway, I got out the pool, went back to my room, and it came back. So they came and gave me tablets, blah, blah, blah. I said, look, whatever you're giving me is not happening. I need the same stuff I had in Takuda in Bulgaria to get rid of this. So they then got a doctor in and said, he needs to go to hospital. So they literally, hotels don't like you going down the front of the hotel ill. So I remember they literally took me like a VIP guy. They took me down the back, blah, blah, blah. I'm in this ambulance, things swirling. There's stuff hitting the ambulance because you're in a hurricane. It was so surreal. It was like a disaster movie. I'm thinking, what is going on? So I get to the hospital and they quickly realise I need an emergency operation. My gallbladder was about to burst. Now, if anyone listening to this knows about gallbladder is supposed to process the fat that you eat. Mm-hmm. They asked me, you must have been in pain for 5 years. I said, no, I just had it in the last week. I do have a high pain threshold. So anyway, I was then told, you're about to be operated on. I'd never been on the operating table, blah, blah, blah. I have to say to all the Filipinos listening to this, Philippines is the best place to be in trouble. The service in that country, they can't do enough for you. Dr. Helen, who looked young enough to be at school, she said, this is what's going to happen. You're going to wake up at 6 o'clock and everything will be good. Anyway, I had the operation. I woke up at 9. I said, why was it 3 hours long? He said, we found a problem. I said, what problem? He said, we needed a second surgeon to help because your gallbladder was so blown, you were touching your liver, there were some complications. I said, am I okay? He said, no, it's all okay. You're now going to be on recovery. And I say this to people, anyone listening to this who's never been under the knife of an operation, once they put that gas on you, you're out. And I thought, what if I'm not out? They put me out. So the clock went from 3 o'clock to 9 o'clock in minutes. Yeah. So I woke up, they've operated on me. It was just surreal. And then I spent the best thing about being on a hospital bed in Manila, the Olympics were on in Paris. So normally I'd be at work or in the mountains. I spent over a week watching the Paris Olympics, which I could never have done had that not happened. So I always like to take the positives.
Yeah, that's amazing.
So I had a great experience. And again, I constantly thank my Filipino, both my colleagues, the hospital, and particularly Dr. Helen, who did a fantastic job.
Yeah, but because of this experience, your dream needed to wait for a bit.
It did. But you know what?
How you managed that?
I did, and it did. It added to my story. It's like all the other things that happen in life. I always say to people, whether it be going in the mountains or going on an adventure, if you don't have those added, I went to live on a kibbutz. There was a Gulf War. I went to Everest. Everest in itself is a drama, but there was an earthquake. In 1999, I went to a conference in Florida. Hurricane Floyd hit us and we were stuck in a hotel for 2 days.
Wow.
I'm not saying everywhere I go there's a natural disaster.
Every challenge for you come with an added challenge.
Yeah, and do you know what? That's where the book comes in. I have in my head, or I've written a few bits, I've written some chapters. At some point when I'm retired, I will write, I've already got the title, and there's a special chapter on Bulgaria. Okay. But I won't share the title, but there's a book in there. And again, that in itself is a challenge because I'm not in it for profit. Any funds, any money I raise, so to speak, will go towards a charity here in Bulgaria. Amazing. And my good friend Angela Riddell, who is the lady that won the prize, the Booker Prize, who translated that Bulgarian book into English. I think it was called Time Shelter or something similar. Yeah. I have to ask her to translate it into Bulgarian for me. Yeah. So that will be good.
We'll wait. And at the end of our conversation, I want to ask you to leave a message to everyone that have stayed with us through the whole conversation, through the whole podcast. But would you mind if you try to let your advice or let your message to them in Bulgarian?
My message in Bulgarian? I probably can't give you anything philosophical. I'll let you hear my Bulgarian and you tell me if it's any good. So when I first meet people, I like to sort of give them a sense of that I have learnt some Bulgarian. So let me give you a very good short story. I went to a business meeting in Burgas and it was a mainly British audience mixed in with Bulgarians. And what happened was each person was asked to stand up and introduce themselves. Everyone did it in English. And I was like the 30th person. And I stood up everyone expecting me, they could see I was English, and I said the following, you know, аз съм Тони, аз съм от Англия, живея в България около 7 години, живея близо до американско посолство, работя в България около 8 години, живея в България с жена ми, Sharon, and that's it. So I do want to learn more Bulgarian, but here in Bulgaria, you know, 31 letters of the Syllabic, only 5 are English, same as the Latin English. It is a challenge for a guy who is from a country where, unfortunately, so many people in the world speak English.
Yeah, and looking back, what are you most proud of?
What I'm most proud of is the following, is I know statistically, and I read this in an article some years ago, 40% of expats who move to another country, it fails. It fails because they don't have a supportive partner. It fails because they don't embrace the culture. It fails, it could be they don't like the food, they don't like the language, for various reasons. I'm very proud of the fact I've not only succeeded here in Bulgaria, I think I've surpassed what my expectations are. And I do believe I'm one of those expats who's contributing net value to the Bulgarian. I'm not just living here, you know, taking my money and just waiting to move on to the next place. I genuinely am embracing it, not for any, you know, not for any other reason, that I genuinely love living in this wonderful country called Bulgaria.
And looking forward, what are the next challenges or goals that you have?
I mentioned earlier, I do want to expand on my swimming. I do want to learn new skills. I'd like to try my hand at painting one day. I would also like to improve my golf, which has sort of remained flat for the last few years because I've focused on the 56 peaks. I do want to continue doing my speaking here in Bulgaria because I definitely see a need or a want for someone with my speaking skills in front of an audience. But specifically on the challenges, we've now finished the 56 peaks. We're now moving on to our next challenge where we're just completing the branding, and it's going to be called the Balkan 6 Peaks Challenge. So wow. The Balkan 6 Peaks is something that we made up ourselves amongst our friends. There are, in addition to Musula in Bulgaria, there are 5 countries surrounding Bulgaria. And you know what they are. There's Turkey, Greece, there's Serbia, North Macedonia, and Romania. Each of those countries have got their own highest peak. Now, we've done Musula, number 1 done. Earlier this year with my good friend, we did the highest peak in Turkey, which was called Ararat. So we've got 4 more peaks. We're looking to do the Serbian peak in February. And also in September, we're looking to do Mount Olympus, which will be our 4th peak. And then we're left with North Macedonia and Romania in 2027. Again, it's the same approach. We're trying to introduce anyone watching this who is interested in coming with us. We are welcoming all sorts, all shapes and sizes. But also,
how can they join?
Well, there will be, if you search for the 56 peaks, if somebody wants to get hold of me on my, can I give my WhatsApp number here?
Sure, we can leave it in the description.
Leave it in the description, but you know, via WhatsApp, and as has done recently, those 100 people have developed over 3 years. I'm expecting more people to join. Dimitar was number 101 on the final peak. Even since then, I've had a selection of people say, we'd love to be involved in your Balkan 6 peaks. So we are learning all the time how we can expand this. We might get our top sponsored by companies. We're making this into like its own sort of mini adventure company, which ultimately at the center of it is raising awareness and funds for Our Children Foundation.
Yeah.
So.
I love the foundation as well, and I'm glad that the foundation make me meet you because
That's where we met.
Yeah, that's where on the night of Virtues.
Yeah, the evening of virtues.
Yeah. So to close this podcast, I want to give you the word to you to leave a special message for all the young people that are watching this episode. And yeah, what's your message to all the young people trying to find their place in this world, their own challenge in this world?
It's a cliche, but I'll continue to repeat it because, as Richard Branson says, it's the simple ideas which are the easiest ones to understand. So what I would say is in all you do, you know, if that's your comfort zone and that's the non-comfort zone, move yourself into the non-comfort zone. So, you know, as I always like to say in various talks that I give, is you can choose what your challenge could be. It could be learning a new skill. It could be, you know, do what I did. If you can't swim, learn to swim. Learn a new skill. It could be, you know, volunteering in the community. It could be any sort of, you decide. We've got wonderful things called Google searches and chat GPTs. Find yourself something to do that's out of the ordinary. That's what I like. First thing, dedicate time to it. Let people know about it, because if you let people know about it, then you're committed to it. And we're at this time of the year going into New Year's resolutions. Pick 2026, you know, and the standard ones that people do is, you know, lose weight, get fit. They could be the challenge, but, you know, do something that may be contributing to the wider community. You know, go and help pick rubbish in your local community. The mountains have some rubbish, clear those away. It could be anything. Do that, and then once you've did it, commit to it. As I did over 3 years with my teammates, you know, it was raining outside. That's not a time just to stay curled up with a duvet. Get out there, commit to it, do it, and as I like to say, you know, start climbing.